So there's a lot more that you can do with Bristol than just constructing cubes, and one of the best ways to kind of figure that out, I think, is to take your scrap Bristol and make some little study models. So in this case, one of the things I'll show you, and as an aside with the study models, because they're really just little experiments, you don't have to worry about being quite so precise. So if you have a long strip of paper, one of the things you can do is kind of curl it together, and you can see this actually winds up having a little bit of a score line here. So if you wanted to hold this ring together, all we would do is cut a slot in one side, and then we can actually just notch the end of the paper into the slot. So you can see that that actually holds its shape pretty well. It's got a good little structure to it. And so that could be really helpful for your project here. Another thing you might try is bringing tension into the curve of Bristol. So in this case, we might cut something that looks a little bit more like a triangle and see, like, can we get it to hold its shape in more of a curve? One good trick for this actually is if you have the edge of a table, you can kind of run the paper around the edge of the table to kind of get it to mold into that shape and kind of hold that shape. That's not going to be a very intense curve, obviously, but with the heat of your hands too, you can really warm it up and start to get it to come into a form like that. We might also do something kind of similar with that little strip that we just did. So here, if we want it to stick in a shape like that, we could simply add a notch here, a little slot. And here we start to get another kind of interesting form. You can see how it's definitely related to this one, but a bit different. And you can certainly experiment. So just because you make one form doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be like finished with that little scrap. You might get kind of interested in thinking about, well, how could it hold a curve like this? And so in this case, I would maybe experiment with a little score line from this point to this point and see if that helps anything. And at this point, you could certainly use a little bit of glue and hold this thing in place. One thing I'll say is that you want to make sure that every decision you make for your project is really intentional. So here, you can see the paper is starting to crinkle, and that looks a little bit messy. You know, it's not as nice as our very smooth cube. So you can take advantage of that texture, but if you don't really mean for it to have that texture, I would avoid it. And if you wind up with it, then you want to just simply redo it. So there are a million other things you can do with Bristol, and experimentation is how you're going to be able to figure those things out.